Thickening soups and creamy sauces. It really is easy to avoid flour in a soup just by choosing a soup recipe that doesn't contain any flour, like a chicken and veggie soup or a blended vegetable soup like butternut squash. But if you want to take a classic recipe like clam chowder or a creamy chicken soup or a creamy broccoli soup, and you want to make that gluten-free, here are some tips. So flour. So when you have a soup or a sauce recipe that calls for wheat flour, just replace the same amount with a half and half mix of brown rice flour and tapioca starch. So if the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of wheat flour, just replace that with 1 tablespoon brown rice flour and 1 tablespoon tapioca starch. And then you can cook the recipe exactly as the directions state. And this is sometimes a method called a roux, like if you're toasting the flours in butter at the beginning of the recipe. And I'm going to demonstrate how to make a gluten-free roux in another lesson. Puree is another really great technique for how to thicken your soup or a sauce. So after cooking your soup, take a small amount out and puree it and then add it back in. And before you puree it, of course, take out any proteins, like if your soup has chicken or, some sort of meat in it, make sure those don't go into your puree. Or use something else to puree and thicken the soup later after it's cooked, like a little cooked cauliflower or potato. So you would just take a little bit of the liquid out of your soup or your sauce, blend it with a little bit of potato or cauliflower, and then add it back in. And that might create the thickening that you're looking for. You can also make a slurry after your soup is cooked. Maybe at the end of cooking it, you realize that you want it a little bit thicker, but you don't want to do the puree, you don't want to do some of the other options. You can make a cornstarch slurry just like you would make a turkey gravy at Thanksgiving. The usual mix for that is 1 tablespoon cornstarch to 2 tablespoons liquid in a bowl, and then you mix that up. And that's for every cup of liquid that you want to thicken. That should work really good for a thin sauce or soup. Or if you're doing something thicker, you can do 2 tablespoons cornstarch to 2 tablespoons liquid. Another really great one, and I use this a lot when I'm cooking for dairy-free, is using a little coconut cream. This is that thick part of the coconut milk that's usually at the top of the can when you open up a can of coconut milk. And if you really want to make sure that that coconut cream has separated from the thinner liquid, you can put that can in the refrigerator overnight. And then when you open the can up, all of that thick, wonderful, fatty coconut cream should be at the top. In general, if you need to thicken at the beginning of your cooking, as for like a soup or a stew, you're going to use a grain starch like rice flour because it's going to end up being cooked and then you won't taste it anymore. But if you're done with cooking and you want to thicken something at the end, then you're using something like a starch, like a cornstarch, which doesn't have to be cooked as long or as much.